you sucker. On the corner of Canal and Broadway, where that huge sign says "Love me" and shrouded graffiti and the stench of weed.
Hello. Welcome back to Two Nates on Sports. My name is Nathan Simmons. With me, as always, is Nathan Kwan, and our special guest, Evan Tenenbaum, is here to preview the National League today. All right, you guys, take it away.
Thanks, Nathan. We're going to go ahead and talk about the National League now. Like the American League, like we did before, we're going to go in reverse order of the projected standings for each division, talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each team, and who we think will make a difference in that team's quest to win their division. We will start with the NL West. In last place in the projections is the San Diego Padres at 67.5 wins. Kwan, who did they add and who did they give up in the offseason?
Yeah, so the San Diego Padres added Trevor Cahill, Julius Chassin, Tyrell Jenkins, and Zach Lee in the offseason. They lost Alexei Amarista, Oswaldo Arcia, Edwin Jackson, John Jay, Derek Norris, Adam Rosales, Tyson Ross, and Carlos Villanueva. So for me, I'm going to go under. I think this San Diego team is clearly rebuilding. I think they possibly could lose 100 games. I could see them easily doing that. I think last year they tried to put together a team that would contend, and that didn't work. And then they just started tearing everything apart. I think their pitching is going to be bad. That rotation with Jared Weaver and Julius Chassin, and behind them you have Perdomo and Friedrich and Cahill. Those are all pitchers that are not very good. So I think their starting rotation isn't good. Offensively, they're going to be terrible. You have Will Myers, who's the lone all-star, but then you have, other than Solarte, you just have a bunch of guys that haven't made an impact on the major leagues yet. Their bullpen isn't going to be good either. So it's going to be a long rebuild in San Diego. This will be a team that could possibly lose 100 games. So I'm going to go under.
Agreed. I absolutely agree. The general manager is a former Rangers assistant GM, and what he's done is completely gut the entire farm system of the San Diego Padres over the last 2 years, and now after seeing that those pieces were not panning out, has tried cashing right back in, but unfortunately, it's probably going to be a little bit too little too late. Will Myers has at least seemed to have bounced back a little bit, but he's never going to be enough to carry a team by himself. This rotation is absolutely putrid. I mean, there's no reason to believe that they believe that they can go over any of their projections.
Yeah, things are not looking pretty in San Diego. First, they lose their football team. Then they lose any good players they pretty much had on their baseball team. You want to, I guess, take solace in the fact that you locked up Will Myers for 6 years, who's an above-average player, I would say. I don't think he's a complete star, as a lot of other people think, but he is the best player on that team, and you're going to need some star power to fill seats in that stadium where the entrance to sports might be fading away. Because you're looking at the rest of the team and you're finding not a lot of good players. Like, for instance, Luis Sardinas is projected to start at shortstop. He was one of the pieces that the Rangers traded to Milwaukee in the Yovani Gallardo trade. And he had very high hopes, at least as a prospect in the Rangers organization. Ever since then, about 2 years ago, he's just done nothing but disappoint in his trips in the major leagues, whether that was starting or acting as a utility player. The good news is he's still pretty young, along with a bunch of other different players on that team. It just no one really screams out potential on that team. And you got to even look at their prospects. A lot of them are 2-3 years down the road from even making an impact on the major league squad. Anderson Espinoza is probably their best prospect. He's ranked number one Baseball America within the organization. He will not be ready for 3 years. That's a long time. 3 years could really affect a lot of fans' opinions on a team, especially a lot of casual fans. So you're going to need to find something to bring up attendance in the next 3 years, and I don't think Will Myers will be enough. Yeah, this team is it's probably going to be the worst in majors this year. I could easily see them losing 100 games. I'm going to go way under. All right, so next in the projections is the Arizona Diamondbacks at 77.5 wins.
So Arizona added Oswaldo Arcia, Jeremy Hazelbaker, Chris Iannetta, Ketel Marte, Jeff Mathis, Fernando Rodney, and Taijuan Walker. They lost Wellington Castillo, Mitch Haniger, Daniel Hudson, Peter O'Brien, Gene Segura, and Ricky Weeks. So for me, I'm going to go under for Arizona. I think their starting pitching was just so putrid last year, and that was a team that was supposed to contend for a playoff spot, and they basically brought back the same starting rotation. They're hoping basically Zach Greinke has a bounce back season. They're hoping Robbie Ray is better. They're hoping Shelby Miller, who is horrible after that trade, is better. They're hoping Corbin is better. So I think that's a lot of hope to put on a starting rotation. I think getting AJ Pollock back in center field will help their offense a lot. And of course, they have Paul Goldschmidt and Jake Lamb, who can mash and hit balls out of the ballpark. But I think there's a 10-game improvement over last year, I think, is a bit of a stretch. So I think the Diamondbacks will be better, but I don't think they're going to reach the Vegas numbers. So I'm going to go under.
Agreed. Another team in the NL West, another team that has gone through years of mismanagement from the front office. At the very least, they at least have some stars in Paul Goldschmidt and Zach Greinke, and there seems to be at least some talent on the rotation, but at the same time, like I don't see Shelby Miller at all bouncing back. I mean, Taijuan Walker might be able to find his groove outside the confines of Safeco, but I wouldn't exactly bet on it. But to top it all off, again, this is just a team that just doesn't have a whole lot of talent outside of someone like Paul Goldschmidt. I mean, they do have AJ Pollock, and he's been pretty good. But outside of that, there's just not enough. I will probably be taking the under with this team.
Yeah, I have them as barely under. If AJ Pollock is healthy, then he will be a top contributor at the top of that lineup. I really like the top of that lineup with Pollock, Lamb, and Goldschmidt and David Peralta. I have doubts about that rotation. I am a little bit more of a Taijuan Walker believer, even though he did pitch in a pitcher's park for the beginning of his career. And I've always been really soft on Patrick Corbin. He got Tommy John a couple of years ago. Didn't work out so well after that, but maybe that's an adjustment period that he needs to make. I have no hope for Shelby Miller, though. He was just awful at every single level that he was at last year. I wouldn't be surprised to see him out of the league by the end of this year. And then that bullpen is just pretty average. They have 40-year-old Fernando Rodney closing. You never know what you're going to get with that guy. And also, Ranger favorite Tom Wilhelmsen is also in that bullpen. So you'll give up a lot of runs there. So I think a very strong top of the lineup is not enough to save this Diamondbacks team that took a huge risk in Shelby Miller, among other players, and it did not pan out that well. I'll go at like 75 or so, which is just under. All right, so the third team within the NL West is the Colorado Rockies, projected at 80.5 wins.
Yeah, so Colorado added Alexi Amarista, Ian Desmond, Chris Denorfia, Mike Dunn, and Greg Holland. They lost Jorge De La Rosa, Nick Hundley, Boone Logan, and Ryan Rayburn. So for me, I have Colorado just under. I think they're a trendy pick for a lot of people this year. Their pitching has gotten a lot better. So I think their starting rotation has a lot of young promise there. And you have arms like Chatwood, Gray, Anderson. They have a lot of upside for them. They also upgraded their bullpen a lot. Their bullpen was the worst in the majors in ERA last year, and they added Greg Holland and Mike Dunn, who I think will help solidify that bullpen a little bit. And obviously the strength of this team is in their lineup with the three-headed monster of Trevor Story, Nolan Arenado, and Carlos Gonzalez in the middle. So I think they're going to mash a lot of home runs. They're going to score a lot of runs. I think how far this team will go will be their pitching, obviously. And it's tough at Coors Field, but I think they trust the young arms they have, and I think they have a good chance of getting to that number. So I'm going to go under, but just barely.
I'm going to go slightly over with this team. Again, like you pointed out, Colorado is always a good bet to mash just because of where they play, but especially with this team with Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story, and of course Hargo. They have a very good chance of at least maybe not necessarily going back to those times of Rocktober, but at least bringing back the visage of some of that. And then on top of that, I like what they've done in terms of building that starting rotation. John Gray has been brought along real well, and he looks like he's primed to at least have a decent year. Or at least as decent a year as a pitcher can have it playing in Coors Field. And on top of all that, and it kind of links back to the other two teams that we talked about in both the Padres and the Diamondbacks. But since I believe both those teams are going to be so down, at the very least, the Rockies are going to see a huge benefit from that. So that's the big reason why I am going over with this team.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you in that sense. I think having relatively weak offense from Arizona, at least on the back end, and every position pretty much weak in San Diego, that any home games that they're playing against Colorado automatically gets the advantage in that sense. So I do think that offense is pretty steadily. Trevor Story is an incredible player in a matter of his power that you can get out of a shortstop. And that outfield is really good, even without a player like Ian Desmond, who was supposed to play outfield. Then they pushed him to first base, and then he fractured his hand last week. So now you got to put in a replacement level Mark Reynolds. So, I mean, that lineup really isn't that bad. I think the bench is a little weak, other than Alexei Marista. And I don't know. I'm not so sold on the starters as much. I do see promise in Anderson and Chatwood, and I guess this rookie Kyle Freeland, but I just don't trust any Colorado pitcher to have a good season ever. I think Ubaldo Jimenez is just the one in a million. That 1 year that he was the Cy Young contender, with the way that the altitude at Coors Field just goes, I just don't trust any pitching that Colorado can produce. So I'm going to go under just on that factor. So finishing in second place in the projection is the San Francisco Giants at 87.5 wins.
Yeah, so San Francisco added Nick Hundley and Mark Melancon over the offseason. They lost Gregor Blanco, Santiago Casilla, Chris Heston, Javier Lopez, Angel Pagan, Jake Peavy, and Sergio Romo. Okay, so for the Giants, I'm going to go over. So I think their offense is going to be better than it was last year. They have to hope for health from Hunter Pence and Joe Panik, but those two provide so much of their offense, and they missed so many games last year that it really hurt them. I think solving left field, hopefully Jared Parker is going to be their starting left fielder. He is better than the people that they had last year, because Angel Pagan and the players that they were running out in left field weren't cutting it for that team. I think their starting pitching is Madison Bumgarner, Johnny Cueto. They also get a full season of Matt Moore, who they picked up from the trade deadline last year. So the starting rotation is good. The bullpen will be a little bit better as well. Mark Melancon is a good closer, all-star caliber. So they had some problems in the bullpen last year, but I think Melancon solves that. I think the Giants, I'm buying them this year. So I'm going to go over.
I'm going to go over as well. Maybe barely as well. But I mean, at the same time, they're going to be playing in that division. They're going to be playing the San Diego Padres and the Arizona Diamondbacks more than most teams. That should at the very least account for some of that. But also at the same time, they're bringing back most of the lineup that they had from previous years when they were just wrecking shop. But at the same time, I can't say I'm completely sold on some of the younger talent that they've been bringing up, like this Joe Panik and among others. I mean, Buster Posey is. I mean, Brendan Crawford and Buster Posey and Brandon Belt, I think will be enough to help carry this team's offense. I expect Hunter Pence to probably go back down a bit, just due to old age. But at the same time, I can't say I'm completely sold on this rotation outside of Madison Bumgarner. While he's a perennial Cy Young contender, you have someone like Johnny Cueto, who is constantly injured. You also have Jeff Samardzija, who, for all intents and purposes, has at the very least inconsistent, at the very most completely overpaid and just horrendous. Matt Moore, he was once considered the best prospect in all of baseball at one point, is pretty much a shell of his former self after Tommy John surgery. And Matt Cain is also someone that's kind of running a bit on fumes from the last time he was a Cy Young winner. But at the same time, you can't discount San Francisco Giants' double magic. So they'll probably win enough to make it into the playoffs again, and we'll see what happens.
But Nathan, you're forgetting one key crucial thing. The current year is 2017. It's not an even year. Therefore, you have nothing to worry about with Giants devil magic.
Perfect. I have to worry about Cardinals devil magic instead.
Anyway, so regarding your concerns with the San Francisco rotation, I really don't have any issues or any concerns with any of them. I do think Jeff Samardzija is the most inconsistent out of all of them, and I would say he's overpaid. But the rest of them, I've always had good feelings about. Bumgarner is a stud. Johnny Cueto, when he's healthy, he's fantastic. Who would have thought that Johnny Cueto and not Matt Latos was the best pitcher to come from the Reds organization? And then Matt Moore, I'm super jealous that the Giants got him in the trade deadline last year. And Matt Cain has just been haunting all of our dreams in the last 7-8 years. So I actually really like this rotation. Getting Melanson was absolutely crucial to at least keeping up with the Los Angeles Dodgers. I don't think it's going to be enough to necessarily carry them over, especially with just this pretty average starting lineup outside of Buster Posey and Brandon Belt and sometimes Hunter Pence. So I'll go over on the projection. I'll have them at 88 wins. Okay, so the last team in the NL West will be the Los Angeles Dodgers. They're projected at 94.5 wins.
Okay, so the Dodgers added Brett Ebner, Logan Forsythe, Brandon Morrow, Vidal Nuno, and Sergio Romo. They lost Brett Anderson, Joe Blanton, Jesse Chavez, Jose De Leon, JP Howell, Howie Kendrick, Josh Reddick, and Carlos Ruiz. So I'm going to go under for LA. I think that the favorite in the division, and I think that's due to their outstanding pitching. They have obviously the best pitcher in the league in Clayton Kershaw, Kenta Maeda, Rich Hill. Kershaw missed 2 months last year, and the Dodgers still won the West easily. So I think having him healthy for a full year helps them immediately in their pitching staff. I think re-signing Kenley Jansen to be one of the best closers in the league it makes their bullpen is going to be one of the best in the league again. I think the biggest question marks with this team is they struggle to score runs consistently. I think Corey Seager is a stud, and he and Justin Turner really were the leaders offensively for that team. But you have declining veteran in Adrian Gonzalez, and their outfield was really not productive last year. Yasiel Puig got sent down to AAA. Jock Peterson had kind of a disappointing year, and left field has really been a black hole for them. Right now they have Andre Ethier there, but I think really they could bring up one of their prospects, Cody Bellinger, who's actually Baseball America's number 7 overall prospect. He's a first baseman by trade, but I think he's good enough defensively that he might fit in at left field at some point this year, especially since he's blocked at first base by Adrian Gonzalez. So I think offense is the biggest question mark for this team. I think the pitching is outstanding, and I'm going to go slightly under. I still think they're going to win the division, but I think it'll be under.
I'm going to go slightly over. I mean, again, I have some of the same questions with some of the supporting cast with in terms of their position players. I think Jock Peterson, he has a much more consistent year. I think a lot of his inconsistencies from last year were a lot more due to just being so young and just like getting used to the major leagues and getting used to other teams being able to solve him and be able to throw something different. So I think he's able to adjust and become a much more consistent player and a much more consistent contributor going forward. And again, like Corey Seager is looking more and more like a potential is on the cusp of superstardom. And of course, that rotation is stellar. And the big thing that has me sold on this team is, of course, their farm system. I mean, you can obviously get the best prospects in the world if you are able to pay top dollar, but at the same time, they've done such a great job with scouting as well and making sure that money, which they have a lot of, and they can spend their ways out, they can spend themselves out of a jam. But at the same time, they've done such a good job in identifying talent that they pretty much have all types of depth at pretty much every position. And so I suspect that this team is going to be very well built for the rigors of an entire regular season. The big question going forward is just whether or not they can finally get over that hump and finally make it to the World Series. And so that's a lot of that's just going to be riding on whether or not like Clayton Kershaw can sort of, I mean, obviously this is going to be like for maybe later on in this episode, but when we talk about the playoffs, but a lot's going to depend on Clayton Kershaw and whether or not he can emulate his own inner Madison Bumgarner and completely carry this team on his back.
Yeah, I have the Dodgers under. I'm not so sold on this rotation as some of y'all. Obviously, Clayton Kershaw is the best pitcher in Major League Baseball. Future Hall of Famer in him. And Kenta Maeda is pretty good, but other than that, I just have so many questions. Rich Hill just got paid a lot on the chance that he has more than one good year in him. He's 37 already. I already feel like he's going to be a disappointment to his contract. Now he might pitch okay, but I have my doubts that he'll pitch to what his contract is worth. Brandon McCarthy is awful and hurt all the time. I did hear reports that Haijun Ryu might actually be back sometime this season. He hasn't pitched for the Dodgers in 2 years, but you don't know what you're going to get with a guy like him. So I think my doubts are a little bit stronger in the rotation. The offense is pretty all right. I do like Corey Seager a lot. I do like Jock Peterson a lot. Yasmani Grandal behind the plate. I do want to understand what the Dodgers want to do with Yasiel Puig. The last 3 or 4 years, he's just been such an inconsistent player, a hot-headed character. Doesn't really know what he wants to be as a major leaguer. He had such a good rookie year, and he's just flamed out to just be, I guess, an average player. But I guess it's just the way he is. But the Dodgers, I'm not sure what they want to do with him. If they have, I guess, Bellinger coming up soon that could play the outfield, I would look at Puig's position in danger, even though the left field position is probably in a worse state right now. I don't know. I'm not as high as the Dodgers as I probably thought I would be. I just think, having the best pitcher doesn't necessarily make your team an automatic first place team. Look at the Angels with Mike Trout. They're not a first place team with only one superstar. And I would probably say the same about the Dodgers. I think they just have a little bit stronger supporting cast. So I'm going to go under, and you'll have a little bit surprised at our predictions for the playoffs. Well, we can go ahead and move on to the NL Central. We will start with the last place projected team, which is the Milwaukee Brewers. They are projected at 69.5 wins.
Okay, so Milwaukee added Neftali Feliz, Tommy Malone, Travis Shaw, Eric Sogard, and Eric Thames. They lost Chris Carter, Martin Maldonado, and Tyler Thornburg. I'm going to go over. I think the Brewers, they upgraded their bullpen. Neftali Feliz will help. I like Travis Shaw at third base. I think that's been a hole for them the last couple of years. Eric Thames, bringing him back from Asia, I think that's an interesting signing. I think he's going to provide more consistency than you got with Chris Carter. I do think that Carter he was a big source of their power last year, so it's going to be interesting how that trade-off with Thames goes. I think there's a lot of young players with promise on that team. Domingo Santana, was a top prospect for the Astros. Jonathan Villar was still a young player, and he actually had a really good year last year. So I think their offense will be better than it was last year. Their pitching staff is still mediocre. They have a lot of guys that have a lot to prove in the major league. So I think their pitching is what's going to – I have them over 69.5.
I have them slightly over. So basically, this team is still in full. This Milwaukee team is still in full rebuild. Even still, though, they have a strong veteran presence with Ryan Braun, who, while he still has struggled with his with his scandals during his MVP season, he is still a very valuable, if albeit somewhat overpaid, contributor among their position players. That being said, they just don't have enough firepower in their rotation, as well as their bullpen, to really at all keep up. But that being said, I think this is they have some nice pieces on the farm, and right now all they're trying to do is just focus on trying to rebuild through that. And I still expect them to win a little bit more than what they are projected to right now.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I don't think they're as bad of a team as the Vegas rankings rank them at. They are in a definitive rebuild. They're probably a year or two away from competing at this point. I am not so sold on Neftali Feliz. I think it's more of he's in the closer role as a necessity. I think ever since his surgery back in 2013, I just think after his surgery since 2012, he has not been the same pitcher as he's been. Took his rehab a little bit less seriously, got hurt, and then just lost complete velocity. If you remember, he was throwing fire as the closer for the Rangers back in 2010.
At one point, he had, I think, the 5th fastest fastball ever thrown in Major League history.
That sounds about right. But Neftali Feliz is not the same as he's been. They really don't have that many other pieces in that bullpen that could definitively take away that closer spot, other than maybe Corey Knebel, who was the closer for 3 years. As far as the offense goes, I think that'll be their strong suit. Jonathan Villar and Ryan Braun and Domingo Santana will be their key contributors to that offense. It'll be interesting to see how Travis Shaw works in. Also, they pulled Jet Bandy from the Angels as a suitor replacement for Jonathan Lucroy. It'll be interesting to see if he'll be at a decent catching rate. Look out for Lewis Brinson to eventually take over the center field position for that team sometime this year. He is the top prospect in the organization that he received. The Brewers received from the Jonathan Lucroy trade. Brinson was highly touted within the Rangers organization as a defensive whiz and a main contact guy. So you could see a potential leadoff player in a few years, or someone who fits in nicely in the second spot. So I have the Brewers at like 71 or 72 wins, a little bit higher than the projection. So next on the list would be the Cincinnati Reds, projected to finish at 70.5 wins.
Yeah, so Cincinnati added Arizmendi Alcantara, Luis Coleman, Richie Schaefer, and most notably Drew Storen. They lost John Lamb, Ross Ohlendorf, Kabias Sampson, Alfredo Simon, and Ramon Cabrera. So I'm going to go under for Cincinnati. They are in a massive rebuild right now. Their pitching was god-awful last year, and I don't think they're going to be much better this year. I think when your depth chart shows Scott Feldman as your number one, that shows you have a big problems there. I do like Brandon Finnegan, and Cody Reed is a young pitcher, so there's promise there, but there's going to be a lot of growth and hope needed for that rotation to be any good. That bullpen is even worse. They finally got rid of Ohlendorf, but they have a bunch of guys that, other than Storen, haven't proved anything in the majors. Offensively, they, other than Joey Votto, Adam Duvall, and Scott Schebler, it's a lot of not much. I think Zach Cosart is to be traded at some point this year if he's doing well. On the farm, Nick Senzel is Baseball America's number 9 overall prospect. He's a third baseman by trade. He could come up and play short as well. So that's what they have coming up for them, but that's pretty barren at this point. And I think Cincinnati is in for another couple of years of losing baseball. So I'm going to go under.
I'm going to go under as well. There's not a lot of excitement with this team, or much to look forward to. I honest to God, kind of feel bad for Joey Votto because I mean, like year in and year out, he's been one of the most consistent hitters in all of Major League. It's just that the team surrounding him hasn't always been up to par. Although part of that is there was a time that they were, but they just choked in the playoffs. But that being said, this team, as Kwan pointed out, is in full rebuild, and they also have arguably even less pieces on the farm than the Milwaukee Brewers do. I mean, granted, they could very easily replenish it if they ever decided to trade away Joey Votto, but that would be a blockbuster deal. That being said, they do have some players. I mean, most famously, they have Billy Hamilton, who at one point was considered the fastest player in all of baseball. But outside of that, and maybe I guess Adam Duvall, who I believe I can't remember. I don't think it was last year, but maybe the year before, he won the home run derby. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot of talent on this team.
Yeah, I have to agree with you about going under. This team is not good in any aspect whatsoever. That rotation is pretty bad. I think Scott Feldman is an average pitcher at best and in no way deserves an opening day start, which is saying something because he started opening day for the Texas Rangers in 2010, which team went to the World Series. So
and the Astros. The Astros.
Yeah, it could be.
I think 2 years in a row.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, Scott Feldman is 1 for 3 in opening day starts in which his team goes to the World Series. So here's hoping that Cincinnati can get the second and somehow make a miracle run of the World Series. Other than that, I don't see any bright spots in this lineup. Billy Hamilton is a fast guy and can play defense really well, but he's not a good hitter. His on base percentage, I guess, could be better if he was a better hitter. But I guess it's just weird for him to be a leadoff guy with such perennial, such average stats. And he has the talent. It just hasn't been shown. Interesting to see how Jose Peraza does. He's in my fantasy league, so he better rack up all those points. And as far as Joey Votto goes, it is amazing how consistent he has been every year, except for 2014 when he got hurt. The problem with Joey Votto is he is signed through 2023 at his enormous 10-year, $225 million deal. So you're looking at a team to pick up 6 years worth of a little bit half of that salary. That's not a tradable contract, in my opinion. So Votto might have to suffer through 2 or 3 years of Cincinnati being god-awful. So yeah, I have them going under, much lower than the Brewers. All right, so third place in the NL Central is given to the Pittsburgh Pirates at 82.5 wins.
So Pittsburgh added not much over the offseason. They added relief pitcher Daniel Hudson. They lost Neftali Feliz, Matt Joyce, Jeff Locke, Sean Rodriguez, and Brian Vogelsong. So this team, a lot of people are picking to bounce back and maybe potentially make the playoffs. I think that's a possibility. They're going to need Andrew McCutchen to return to his MVP level that he was playing before last year, and they also need Garrett Cole to return healthy. I like their starting rotation behind Cole. I think Jameson Taillon is a young pitcher from the Houston area, and he's got a lot of promise. Ivan Nova's been pretty solid for them. Their bullpen was good last year, but they're really young, so hopefully you don't get any regression from them. Tony Watson is the closer, much youth there. I think this team could go really up or down. They're kind of stuck in between this sort of rebuild, sort of declining. So it'll be interesting to see where they are at the trade deadline because Andrew McCutchen is a trade candidate. And if they're not kind of out of it, they could move him and just kind of do a retooling. They have a fielder down in AAA in Austin Meadows, and he's supposed to be a stud for them. So he's kind of being blocked right now by some of the players that they have on the major league roster. So I'm going to go under. I'm not buying the rebuild and back to the playoffs this year for this team. I think they're going to fall just short. So I'm going to go under.
I'm going to go slightly over. I think McCutcheon does find his form again from when he was an MVP, but on top of that, I think Gregory Polanco and Sterling Marte start sort of in some semblance come into their own. Josh Bell, who's actually a DFW kid, and he was actually slated to go to the UT Longhorns, and went so far as to he sent every MLB team a letter saying that don't draft me. I'm sticking with UT. But then clearly the Pirates were able to offer him enough money to definitely reconsider that offer. But Garrett Cole and Jamison Tyone, I believe, will bounce back, creating an incredible 1-2 punch in that rotation.
Okay, I wish I were more optimistic like you are, Simmons, but I'm going to have to go under as well. I think the Pittsburgh window has closed. I think McCutcheon having a small resurgence at the end of the year last year was just a minor fluke. I think McCutcheon as a star player within Pittsburgh is done. I think if he can put up a decent first half of the season, he could become trade bait. I'm not sure his contract status right now, but I don't think it's as bad as Joey Votto's situation right now. As far as the rest of that lineup, I don't like anyone except Josh Harrison really that much. Marte's all right. Polanco's all right. You got to look at their starting situation at third base. They have John Ho Kang, who is currently still in South Korea. He's appealing his DUI conviction that he had during the offseason. And he's awaiting a visa so he can enter the United States. He will not be ready for the opening day. So you got to be worried about that. He's a pretty average offensive player, and his replacement is David Freese, who, aside from one specific playoff game, has just been a completely disappointing Major League Baseball player. I really have no hope in getting any value out of that position for the Pirates. I do want to look out for one specific prospect in Tyler Glasnow, who I did get to see at spring training this year. He looks pretty good, and he figures to play into the Pirates rotation. I guess he's the first man up if someone gets hurt. I don't really have much trust in some of those back end players like Chad Cole or Ivan Nova, especially Ivan Nova. And their bullpen is all right, but I think this team is well below what it used to be 2, 3, 4 years ago. So I have them under. All right, so second place in the NL Central is the St. Louis Cardinals. They are only one game above the Pirates in the projection at 83.5.
So St. Louis added Brett Cecil, Dexter Fowler, and John Gant. They lost Jaime Garcia, Jeremy Hazelbaker, Matt Holliday, and Brandon Moss. So I'm going to go over for St. Louis. I like this team. I think that they have a good offense, and they added a leadoff hitter in Dexter Fowler. I don't think losing Brandon Moss hurts that much. I think there's a lot of young players with growth there. Matt Carpenter obviously is the leader in that lineup, but I like Steven Piscotty. I like Dimas Diaz, Yadier Molina behind the plate. I like the rotation with Adam Wainwright. Carlos Martinez is good. Mike Leake, hopefully you would think I would have a bounce back season. And Lance Lynn is solid back of the rotation if he can come back from injury successfully. I like their bullpen. There's not too much depth there, but Seung-Hwan Ho was good last year and was solid. So I think this is a playoff team. I'm going to go over.
I think this is a playoff team as well, but I'm going to go slightly under. But that being said, like you pointed out, this is they have a very, very solid rotation with Adam Wainwright at the top. Now, that being said, they're also going to be Adam Wainwright at the top, and this team is riding on some very young arms trying to either continue their form or try bouncing back. Specifically, Carlos Martinez and Michael Wacha, a former Aggie. But on top of that, I like the addition of Dexter Fowler, who is actually the more productive of the two outfielders between him and Jason Hayward, who was controversially taken from the St. Louis Cardinals to go join the Cubs. But that being said, I mean, as much as I dislike this team in terms of just general perception and whatnot, at the end of the day, this is a very strong team with a very strong farm system. But that being said, I'm not entirely sold on the position players that they have right now. Outside of Dexter Fowler, I mean, Colton Wong was pretty good. And Matt Carpenter has been very on and off. And Stephen Piscotty, I don't know if he's shown enough to be considered someone that you can rely on to give production day in, day out. And of course you have Yadier Molina, but he's definitely in the decline phase of his career. But it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they can recapture that devil magic that they had back in 2011 and 2013 up until facing the Boston Red Sox in the World Series. But we'll see.
Yeah, I'll go over as well, except for the fact that I do not have them as a playoff team, and you'll hear eventually. But I do think that the lineup is pretty solid. Dexter Fowler is a great leadoff hitter. That they needed. I do like Alan Diaz, though his splits last year, first half was so much better than the second half. It was obvious he wasn't going to sustain going over 400 batting average, but you have to watch out for see if he can kind of go back towards his first half numbers. He's similar in that sense to Nomar Mazara, who also had a really torrid first half and in a pretty pedestrian second half. You also have the potential Hall of Famer Yadier Molina as a complete base to that offense. As far as the rest of the team, I'm not as so sold on that starting rotation. Wainwright's starting to age a little bit. Carlos Martinez is going to get the opening day start, and he has a lot of potential. So you should expect good from him. The rest of that team, I'm just very iffy with. Mike Leake, Lance Lynn, and Michael Walker. They've all had injuries and troubles, so you'll have to watch out for that. And then I like the bullpen a lot, keeping Trevor Rosenthal and Brett Cecil and Jonathan Broxton. Their closer So-Won Oh. I don't know much about him, but it has to be good if he's slated as a closer role. So I say all in all that I think their projection's a little bit low. I don't know how you can count a playoff team at 83.5 wins. I have them at about 85 or so. A pretty solid team. I just don't know if it'll be enough. And no surprise to anyone, but the first place team in the projection is the Chicago Cubs, last year's World Series champions. Maybe I won't be able to say that sentence for another 108 years, but who knows? The Chicago Cubs are projected at 95.5 wins.
Okay, the defending champs added Brett Anderson, Wade Davis, Brian Duensing, John Jay, and Koji Uehara. They lost Trevor Cahill, Aroldis Chapman, Chris Coughlin, Dexter Fowler, Jason Hamill, David Ross, Jorge Soler, and Travis Wood. So I'm going to go over. I think the Cubs won't win as many games as they were last year, but this team is absolutely stacked. They have the best pitching staff in baseball with John Lester, Kyle Hendricks, Jake Arrieta, two superstars in Chris Bryant and Anthony Rizzo in the lineup. Addison Russell is a star as well. Kyle Schwarber, they're going to get back from injury, and you saw what he did in the World Series last year, and he was a really I think losing Fowler in center and Soler in right, I think those are the two question marks. You're hopefully going to get some sort of bounce back from Jason Hayward. I don't know how you can be worse than you were last year offensively for that team. And they're retooled in the bullpen with Wade Davis coming in for Chapman. So I don't think they're going to win as many games as they did last year when they won 103, but I don't think they're going to lose as many from last year as well. So I'm going to go over. If any team's going to repeat as champs, it's this one.
Yeah, same. I think they're going to go over as well. I mean, it's just there's too much talent on this team and too much talent returning, too much talent in their prime. I mean, just good Lord. I mean, like what has not been said about this team? Yeah, I mean, the big question is just going to be whether or not they can keep everyone healthy. But even then, it's just like when one goes down, they can always have another person to step up. I mean, unless like they all get like mono or the chicken pox at the same time, like I can't see how this team doesn't at the very least come close to going over 100 wins this year.
Yeah, I agree with all y'all. This is a very stacked team. That lineup is pretty good, aside from John Jay. I think it's just fairly average. That bench, though, is really, really good. I like having Miguel Montero off the bench, Javier Baez, Albert Almora, and Matt Caesar. that rotation, I wouldn't call that the best rotation out there, but having Jake Arrieta and Kyle Hendricks and John Lester, all of them were Cy Young contenders in the last few years. And those are your 1, 2, 3 guys. And then having really good pitchers on the back end too. That just speaks wonder. And then I think their strength is really going to come from their bullpen. Other than the Astros, I don't think there's a better bullpen out there. With Wade Davis at a closing position, Koji Uhara, who is just beating all age projections, still being fairly good at the age of 42. Hector Rondon, very solid reliever. Carl Edwards Jr., former Rangers prospect. Pedro Strop, former Rangers player. Justin Grimm, former Rangers player. It seems like this is a Diet Rangers team, just like the Baltimore team was 4 or 5 years ago. Anyway, they all have great potential to be a very, very solid bullpen. I could easily see this team winning 100 games. But you're right, they aren't as good as they were last year. So you'll have to see if any really holes in that lineup develop. And like you said, I think John Jay and Jason Hayward are probably the two most prone to any weaknesses on that team. So yeah, I have them over easily winning that division.
Not really.
All right, so let's move on to the NL East, the final division in our MLB preview. We start with the Philadelphia Phillies, who are projected at 72.5 wins.
Okay, so Philly added Joaquin Benoit, Clay Buchholz, Howie Kendrick, Pat Neshek, and Michael Saunders. They lost Cody Ashley, Peter Borges, AJ Ellis, Ryan Howard, notably, Charlie Morton, and Aaron Ruff. So I'm going to go under for Philly. I think they had the worst run differential in the major leagues last year, and kind of how the Rangers had a really good record despite kind of average run differential. The Phillies had a really good record despite an awful run differential. So I think they're going to regress to the mean. I do like some players on this team. I think they were last in offense last year, but Tommy Joseph, their first baseman who replaced Ryan Howard, I think is a good player. Howie Kendrick and Michael Saunders are the veterans in the outfield. So I think they're going to be solid. But other than that, there's a lot of talent lacking on this team offensively. Their rotation is also not going to be good. Jeremy Hellickson, they didn't really want to bring him back. They gave him that offer sheet, and then he ended up signing it, which surprised him. Clay Buchholz has been a massive disappointment for years with the Red Sox, and their bullpen is Benoit will help a little bit, and Pat Neshek isn't there as well as a veteran, but a lot of young guys and unproven. So I think Philly is going to go down in the number of wins this year than they got last year. So I'm going to take under.
Under as well. The Phillies finally are committing to rebuilding, taking a page out of their crosstown basketball team. But right now, it's just a lot of young players trying to prove themselves. They have a nice piece in Odubel Herrera, a former Ranger. They've decided to bring in someone like Howie Kendrick to play left field, who used to be prior to that. Oh wait, prior to that was a second baseman for the Los Angeles Angels. But outside of that, it's just mostly just biding their time until they can call up all the talent that they have in their farm system that they've been able to acquire through trades. That being said, the person to watch and keep an eye on in all this outside of Herrera is Aaron Nola, their former top 10 MLB pick, who has developed nicely as he came along up the system. Another interesting name, a name of interest, maybe not necessarily on the same level as someone like Aaron Nola, is Jared Eichhoff, a former Ranger prospect himself, who has done a nice job of solidifying a sort of middle of the rotation spot. Someone I think could maybe contribute down the line, but at the end of the day, there's not a lot of potential with him outside of being someone that's in the middle to the bottom of the rotation. But again, just in general, this is a team that's just focused more on the future than it is on the present. That being said, that's the correct direction for this team to be going, and they're finally on the right track. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of those players develop.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think the worst is over in Philadelphia. all those bad contracts that they gave out at the beginning of the 2010s, they're starting to expire at this point. They still owe a little bit of money to Ryan Howard, but that shouldn't be too much big of a deal. Matt Harrison retired, so we surrendered all the money that they were going to owe him. They had a few other contracts that they probably regretted. So all those are gone. So they in the next coming years may have some money to spend, along with a bunch of prospects that seem to project to be ready by the end of this year. Their leading shortstop, J.P. Crawford, should be ready to take over that position by the end of the year. Jorge Alfaro will work into the catching squad and probably will be on the opening roster next year. They also have the outfielder Nick Williams, Mickey Moniak, as great potential outfield candidates that you might see replace some of these, veteran guys like Howie Kendrick or Michael Saunders in the future. As far as this year's team, it's just very pedestrian. I expect good things to come out of Odubel Herrera, and he will be, I guess, the centerpiece of your good Philadelphia Phillies team, which could come as soon as next year or 2019. And the rest of the team is just pretty average. So as far as this year goes, it's a biding your time kind of thing. Hopefully these prospects will pan out better than the Atlanta Braves prospects. If you're a Philadelphia Phillies fan, you're thinking about that. So I have them under. I have them slightly under at about like 70, 71 wins. All right, the next team is the Atlanta Braves. They are projected at 75.5 wins.
Okay, so Atlanta added Bartolo Colon, R.A. Dickey, Jaime Garcia, Luis Guerrera, Micah Johnson, and Sean Rodriguez. They lost John Gant, Tyrell Jenkins, Eric O'Flaherty, A.J. Pierzynski, Williams Perez, Alex Smith, and Chris Withrow. Under on Atlanta, I think that they'll be slightly better than last year. They added a bunch of veterans to the team to bolster that rotation, and R.A. Dickey and Colon, Jaime Garcia. I think they'll help be a little bit better. So the offense was bad last year. They're 29th in runs scored. I don't see too much improvement there. They added a bunch of veterans that are just kind of filling in until the next core for them takes over. I think that core, 2 of the 3 is already up with Freddie Freeman and Dansby Swanson. I think Ozzie Albies is their second baseman of the future, and he's going to be on his way this year. I think Atlanta has a bunch of talent in their lower minors, and it's going to be 2 or 3 years when those players come up that they're going to be really good. But for now, it's just going to be growing pains in a brand new stadium, so I'm going to go under.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go over for the Braves. I have them in optimistic 78 wins or so. I really believe that these prospects that the Braves have are very, very good. I think that steal that they made from Arizona is a fantastic building block for this team. Having leadoff hitter in Darren Ciarte, having a great young prospect in Dansby Swanson, heading that. They have potential in the rest of their infield that will eventually replace their veteran presence in someone like Brandon Phillips, Nick Markakis, and Matt Kemp and all them. I could see Matt Kemp having another bounce back year after awful year in San Diego. Then like you said before, this rotation isn't as bad as people think it is. Julio Teheran is a stud. I have a little bit of faith in Jamie Garcia as a player. He had a really good 2015. And then I not so much in R.A. Dickey. You never know. Again, with knuckleball pitchers, you never know. And then Bartolo Colon is the ageless wonder. You don't know how he resurrected his career, but somehow it worked out. And now you got to start to wonder, is it going to be him or Adrian Beltre that'll be the last 90s player to retire? And so I don't think they're going to be as bad as people said. I think, like the Phillies, the worst is over for them. The last year was a bit awful for the Braves, and I think you'll start to see a good return to form for the Braves team. So yeah, I have them at like 77, 78, 79 wins.
I'm going to go under as well, although very much like the Phillies, this team is on the right track. I really love the trade that they had in order to go get Dansby Swanson from the Arizona Diamondbacks. But unfortunately, this team just doesn't have enough pieces at the major league level to really contend, especially in as tough a division as the NL East, where pretty much almost every team outside of Philadelphia and this one could arguably have a chance. I mean, I guess I'm maybe being a bit too kind to Miami, but at the same time, this team is very much in the middle of a rebuild, but at least they're on the right track and they have some good pieces. I mean, Tehran is still very good and he's still pretty young, although there are some aspects of his peripherals that are cause for concern, specific his fly ball rate, I believe. But outside of that, I don't expect much out of this team. So I'll go under.
I'm as optimistic as y'all are pessimistic about this team. Perhaps it's just because my dad is an Atlanta Braves fan and I need to appease him or something. But other than that, I think we can move on to the next team, which is the Miami Marlins. They are projected at 76.5 wins.
Okay, Miami added AJ Ellis, Jeff Locke, Dan Straley, Junichi Tazawa, Edison Volquez, and Brad Ziegler. They lost Andrew Kashner, Mike Dunn, Jeff Francoeur, Chris Johnson, Jeff Mathis, Fernando Rodney, and of course the tragic death of Jose Fernandez. Under for Miami. I think losing Fernandez in that rotation definitely hurts. Their rotation right now is topped by Edison Volquez, who he's a veteran, but he's definitely not a Fernandez level pitcher. Wei-Yin Chen as well is okay, but their rotation is, I think, going to be not as good as they were last year. Offensively, I think they have a lot of players that have promise. Charles Stanton is obviously a stud, and Christian Yelich is an all-star caliber player as well. But their infield is outside of Justin Bour. I think there's a lot of questions. D. Gordon is really fast, but is he going to get on base consistently enough? And then the left side, I don't like Martin Prado, and Echeverria is okay, but he doesn't really excite me. So I think offensively they're going to continue to struggle, and their starting pitching is just not going to be good enough for them to make a playoff push like they did last year. So I'm going to go under.
I'm going to go under as well. I mean, again, unfortunately, with the tragic death of Jose Fernandez, this team lost arguably their best player, and from what I assume was a great, from what I've heard, is a pretty decent guy as well. You know, but outside of that, I mean, they do still have some pieces at the major league level. Of course, they have someone in Giancarlo Stanton, who is arguably the greatest power hitter in the major leagues right now. D. Gordon did have a pretty good year in 2015, but regressed a bit. There's always a chance that he might be able to bounce back. He's still fairly young. He's going to be 29 this season, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that he bounces back somewhat. Maybe not necessarily to the form that he was in 2015 when he was an outside candidate for MVP. But unfortunately, outside of those guys, and also Christian Yelich, can't believe I forgot to mention him. But outside of those players, there's this team just does not have the firepower to contend. But there's always that outside chance that maybe they rally around the memory of Jose Fernandez and use that as motivation to try to make it into the playoffs. But barring that, I just don't see this team being able to make the wild card, and I don't think they go over their projection.
Yeah, I think this Miami Marlins team is probably the most average team in the major leagues right now. It's kind of hard to get a gauge of what they want to be at this time. They're not exactly rebuilding. They're not exactly a super competitive team. You have some great players in the name of like D. Gordon and Giancarlo Stanton, each with their own facets of the game that they're really good at. But there's also the issue of, can D. Gordon get on base more? Can Giancarlo Stanton keep up his power numbers? Can anyone in that infield other than D. Gordon really do anything offensively? Is that bench going to sustain itself with AJ Ellis aging and Ichiro Suzuki aging? And can that starting rotation be just more than average? They're just full of completely average pitchers. No one strikes me as really that good. And it's a shame because you make up some of these guys and put Jose Fernandez at the top of it, and it's a pretty solid rotation. But we live in a world where that isn't true. So I just can't see anything but this team being average. As far as their projection goes, it was at 76.5 wins. I think an average team like them could probably win 78 or 79. So I'll go a little bit over just on the fact that there are some really good players on that team, but it is just an average team. They look like they will be average for years to come unless Jeffrey Loria decides to actually keep interest in this team with his appointment as an ambassador through, he might have to sell the team. So we'll have to see if a new owner will have more interest in this Miami Marlins team and want to make moves if the team sucks this year or if they're good this year.
Well, that actually might help not having Loria as their owner, considering a lot of the mismanagement that's happened under him.
Precisely. All right, so we will go on to the second place team, the New York Mets, projected at 88.5 wins.
So the Mets didn't add anybody on the free market over the offseason of note. They lost Bartolo Colon, Alejandro De Aza, Kelly Johnson, James Loney, and Logan Verrett. So I'm going to take over for New York. This team was so riddled by injuries last year, and they're going to hopefully get everybody back healthy this year. They're going to get DeGrom, Harvey, and Matz back in their rotation. They all finished the year on the DL. And also position player-wise, Curtis Granderson is the only position player that played more than 140 games this year for that team. They were so injury riddled. I see if everybody's healthy, it's a good lineup that's going to be a lot better than they were last year in scoring runs. I think Jay Bruce has to be better than he was last year because he was god awful after that trade. Yoenis Cespedes and Curtis Granderson are good. And they make up a good offensive outfield. Their infield, Asdrubal Cabrera had a really good year last year when he was healthy, and Neil Walker at second base is good as well. I think third base is an interesting question. So they had Jose Reyes there last year. David Wright is still around. And they also have a young prospect in Ahmed Rosario, who's Baseball America's number 8 overall prospect. And so he could factor into that third base role or even at shortstop if injuries hit them. So I'm buying the Mets this year just on the law of averages. Their health has to be better than it was last year. And they still have one of the best pitching staffs in baseball, and their offense has to be better.
Well, I wouldn't. Well, I personally wouldn't use the law of averages with this, since I mean, once you get injured, it doesn't necessarily mean that next year you're going to be injury free. This is so they have arguably one of the best rotations out there. As I just mentioned, Noah Syndergaard, but on top of that, you have Jacob deGrom, Stephen Matz, Matt Harvey. You still have some people on the lower levels as well. I mean, that being said, the big question is going to be whether or not they can get enough production from their position players. I mean, I know the Yoenis Cespedes has been great, but he's already over 30, and so it's going to be a question of whether or not he can age gracefully. Same with Curtis Granderson as well as Jay Bruce. And on top of that, you're pretty much seeing a team that has largely struggled with their defense, especially in the outfield. And it's hard to see with the starting outfield that they're fielding right now that being any better than it was last year. But they still have some decent players in their infield as well, with Travis DeArnaud, who at one point who along with Noah Syndergaard was the centerpiece for in the R.A. Dickey trade, which is looking better and better with each year. That being said, it's kind of the same problem with the left side of that infield at third base and shortstop. It's another question of whether or not Jose Reyes and Asdrubal Cabrera can either both stay healthy and or maintain some level of production. So it's just a lot. There's a lot of questions with this team, but I still think this team should do better than they're projected, and I think they're going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, guys, I really like this rotation. I know they're all coming back from injury, but having Noah Syndergaard, he's only 24 right now, and he's already making cases for Cy Young. He was an All-Star last year. His FIP was 2.29, which actually is well under what his actual ERA was. You expect him to be even lower than that with those kinds of numbers. So I'm really excited what I'm seeing from Syndergaard. And then all these pitchers coming back from their injuries, DeGrom and Harvey, Stephen Matz, and both of y'all forgot about Zach Wheeler, who got Tommy John surgery last year and should come back this year. I really like this rotation, perhaps a little underrated, but I think they're the best rotation in the National League just by a hair. And I really like bullpen in Fernando Salas and Aston Reed as your main setup guys, and Juris Familia, who has just been making heads roll with how good he's been as a closer. I know he had 30 or 40 straight save opportunities converted last year. He was a very solid player, but But both of y'all said it right, that the offense is going to be the main factor into whether the Mets can succeed this year or not. I don't have as much faith in Travis d'Arnaud as other people do, but he still could be a potentially solid backup in the future. And again, you have to think about the questions at third base between Jose Reyes and David Wright, and really all your aging players that you have on that team. And you want to hope that they age well enough so any young prospects that they have could eventually take over in a few years. I don't think that they necessarily have a window closing because their pitching is so good, but that aging offense is a little worrisome. Nevertheless, I have them well over their projection. I have them surmounting like 90, 91 wins. And the final team in the NL East is the Washington Nationals at projected at 91.5 wins.
Yeah, so Washington added Matt Albers, Adam Eaton, Adam Lind, Joe Nathan, Derek Norris, Eddie Romero, Jacob Turner, and Vance Worley. They lost Matt Belisle, Sean Burnett, Danny Espinosa, Lucas Giolito, Reynaldo Lopez, Mark Melanson, Yusmero Petit, Wilson Ramos, Ben Revere, and Mark Tripchinski. So I'm going to go under for Washington. So the good. So I like them adding Adam Eaton. I think he provides a leadoff hitter that they've been missing over the last couple of years. He is a guy that will get on base and hit for average, can also hit the ball out of the ballpark. I like that addition. I like Trey Turner at shortstop, who came up last year, and he is going to get full season at the major leagues, and it's going to be good to see how well he does. Daniel Murphy had a sensational year last year for that team, and I think Bryce Harper is key. He needs to have a bounce back year. He didn't have MVP season very well last year, and the rotation is still good. So Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg, Gio Gonzalez, Tanner Roark, that is a solid top four rotation. What I don't like about this team is the bullpen. So the bullpen, they lost their closer in Mark Melanson, but they also lost Lopez, Belisle, Jonathan Papelbon, Yusmero Petit. Those pitchers combined to throw 255 and 2/3 combined relief innings for that team last year. They have so much inexperience in that bullpen. Their closer is going to be between Kelly and Trinan, experience in that role. They did add Joe Blanton as a veteran, but other than that, it's just so inexperienced. It's that I don't have confidence in this team repeating as NL East champs. So I'm going to go under. Just so many bullpen questions. And
I'm going to go under as well. I mean, granted, I'm not too worried about Bryce Harper. I mean, he might have had a bit of a down year last year, but I mean, it's not for someone that's still arguably the best player in all of major leagues, and is still in his mid to late 20s. I've lost track of how old this kid is, but
he's 24 years old.
24. So yeah, he's mid 20s. He's still an amazing. I'm not too worried. He's still going to be an amazing player this year. I think he bounces back. That being said, I mean, it's just the team around him that I'm not entirely sold on. I mean, yeah, you have people like Rendon and Zimmerman, and obviously Daniel Murphy, who's been able to continue the success he had in the playoffs of when he was playing for the Mets in 2015. And can continue that all of last year. But outside of those guys, I'm not really sold on everyone else. I mean, I do like the addition of Adam Eaton, but I mean, Jason Worth is someone that's on the decline, and I don't see an immediate replacement for him anytime soon. And with this rotation as well, I mean, the rotation, you still have some of the question marks that the Mets do, in so much that you worry a lot about the injuries, specifically, most famously, Steven Strasburg. But I mean, Max Scherzer, he's getting a bit up in age. Same with Gio Gonzalez. I mean, Tanner Roark has developed well, coming from a fringe prospect that was received in the Christian Guzman trade back in 2010, and turning into a very, very, very solid starting pitcher, but which no one really expected. And that's that. I mean, obviously, you give credit to the development team over there, but you have to give pretty much almost entirely the credit to Tanner Roark on the great work that he's done. But outside of that, I mean, there's just like Kwan said, there's really too many questions with that bullpen. And whether or not they can actually shut down teams once that starting rotation gets gets them to the late innings. But at the same time, they're going to be relying a lot on those position players, and whether or not they can try to repeat, I honestly think the Mets probably take it this year just because of how strong that rotation is. But it should make for a very, very interesting race down the stretch to see who takes the NL East crown.
Yeah, I have to agree with all you. This team is very good. I do think their glaring weaknesses are much stronger than some of their companion teams. That starting rotation looks very good in Strasburg and Scherzer and Tanner Roark as your top three guys. They all have injury concerns, especially Strasburg. You know, the whole issue with resting him back in 2012 and 2013, shutting him down. And then him getting hurt anyway just speaks wonders about a potential fragility in him. And I guess the backup starting pitchers that you would stash in AAA aren't that much better, aren't at a level that you'd feel comfortable with. AJ Cole doesn't look good. Vance Worley has just been awful his entire career. Jeremy Guthrie. They have a prospect in Austin Voth who might be all right, but he probably doesn't project that high. As more than a bottom of the rotation kind of guy. But and like you guys said, that bullpen is not good at all. I don't trust anybody on that bullpen really. It's too young. It's too variable. That you could probably get maybe 1 or 2 career years for some of them. Probably not Joe Blanton, but for some of them you could get surprises that come out of there. Also, their bench just does not look good. Other than Adam Lind, I just don't see anyone contributing positively off the bench in like a late game pitch hitting situation. So, if I were the Nationals, I would hope that my starting pitching can stay healthy and last long enough in the game that you don't have to use your bullpen as much. So you're looking at 6 innings minimum from all your guys, and sometimes that's hard to ask for every single time. Therefore, I have them going under their projection, but still a pretty good team. So that wraps up the NL East. We've gone through all the divisions in the National League. As far as playoffs go for the National League, what do you guys think? Who are the division winners and who are the wildcard teams?
Yeah, for me, I have the Dodgers in the West, I have the Cubs in the Central, and I have the Mets in the East. My 2 wildcard teams are the Cardinals and the Giants.
My 2 wildcard teams are going to be the Giants and the Washington Nationals. The Mets will take the East, the Cubs will take the Central, and the West will go to the Dodgers. And if we go so far as the World Series, I have the Cubs repeating again. I think the Mets will give them a run for it, especially with that starting rotation. I mean, I do, like I said, I do firmly believe that rotation is the reincarnation of Glavine and Maddox and Smoltz. But outside of that, that's really outside of that, I think the Cubs repeat as a World Series, as National League and probably World Series winners.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say that they will be a tie for the NL West division. The San Francisco and LA will tie at 88 or 89 wins, and they will have a tiebreaker to determine who will win that game. I haven't quite decided yet who would win that, but if Clayton Kershaw is playing, if he's starting, then you give the advantage to the Dodgers. In a 1-game advantage, I'd probably give him over anyone else on that team, even Madison Bumgarner. So you can say that the NL West would go to the Dodgers, but only via a tiebreaker game. And then the Cubs in the Central and the New York Mets in the East. And then I have my wildcard winners as the loser of that division tiebreaker game, which in this case would be the Giants, and the Washington Nationals.